Like oh, yeah.
So yeah,
Thank you guys for being patient with me. I appreciate it.
make sure that they show part of the recording.
So just to get, yeah. Did you hear what he said?
It's recording.
It's recording.
recording,
Any
but-
pictures that you guys show won't be part of it because of the way it's set up.
Yeah.
Oh, it only shows that
It'll only
screen.
show it on that display, but
But
it won't actually show on the recording. It's only recording your substance.
Anybody here in attendance?
But per the future, we'll have to
I'll just say
Yeah, it's fine.
Another thing was when you do that, when you click space and it has like pop-ups like that, it won't show that.
oh, it only shows
Like
that
it won't even like
specific-
show
Yeah,
the
it only
color
shows
here.
that.
It'll like only
You
show
want
that.
me to say?
Yeah, you can say.
Okay.
Okay.
So you want me to go?
You can go.
All right, we're gonna start now. So, just that by like a show of hands, has anybody like played with Designer at all? No, nobody. Painter, yep, Subs is Painter. There you go.
There's
Cool.
a few.
Cool. I mean, it's way different, but just to see.
Wait, I can show examples.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Pull one up.
So, does anyone have an idea of what Designer does? Does everybody kind of know that or no? Yes.
See,
Procedural textures. Okay, so these are a bunch of crazy examples. So you can start off with something as simple as like 3 planes, and then you can go to this. It is still 3 planes, but it's just tessellated. And I'll just kind of cycle through. These are all crazy examples, so these aren't really the norm. And I wouldn't expect to do this in your first go, but these maybe third time. But these are just some like kind of cool examples of crazy things that have been done.
Yeah, that's just one plane.
Yeah, Substance Designer doesn't do vector-based displacement. If anyone knows what that is, it's like if you had like a hook come out of the ground, there's space under that hook, but this Designer can't do that. So like nothing is going to have like holes in the inside of it. Yeah. So if all of this is just a height map, so it's all displacement. It was originally a plane. Is another example of one where all the chains are smaller planes, but you know the main sword is just a plane. And then to get the 3D look of it, I think there is another example. Yeah, here. Okay, I don't have another example of it, but to get that 3D look, you just have another plane on the other side, and it's just facing the other way. This one's crazy. I think this one won some Substance Award for just being insane.
That's a whole city.
Yeah, it's a whole village, farmland and all. Just it has water. If you zoom in here, I don't know how good this quality is. It has, yeah, these are boats. You can't really see them, but if you had a zoomed in picture, some pretty high quality boats. And it's all like, this isn't something that's been sculpted or made, and it's just you can't really change it after the fact, after like all the texture work and things like that. With a couple sliders, you can make it infinitely diverse. Here's just another example of it.
Yeah. I've seen like the parameters for this one, like the bend in the river, the amount of trees, the amount of farms, and the shape of the farms. It's all just sliders, so it's like really easy to make this completely different.
Yeah. Here's just another example of a pretty cool environment that you really wouldn't expect to see made in Designer. All of this can be like all of this specific material is animated, so like the waves are moving, and you know the like the foamy water is like crashing against the rocks. Yeah, another cool example of it. Something like this, where it's like you would probably want to do, or another workflow to do something like Fabric-y would be in Marvelous Designer or something like that, to have kind of how the straps crunch up that material. But all this is done in Substance, and there's just another version of it. There's, for this one specifically, he has a ton of different parameters, and parameters are just things that you set at the end to have different variations, to where he has, oh, compared to this one and that one, there's more belts or more straps. He has a bunch of different variations of changing the straps, changing the material below it, and how it works. This is another cool one.
That's a lot.
Yeah, this one just if you looked at like the sword, the axe one before, those are all just planes laying on top of each other, and it's applied essentially like probably 100 times, like a lot more than
Yeah,
100.
I
But
saw that.
yeah, this is just another diverse use for a substance designer. Um, just a bloody bandage. This is all done by just like essentially just cylinders, really. Um, and the material is applied to the cylinder, and where it's like fraying at the end, that's just the opacity kicking in, just like you do anything like that. But you apply that in Substance Designer. And for this one specifically, you can change the amount of blood that's coming through, so you can have like as bloody or as clean as you want. This one is probably the craziest one. Well, it's definitely up there. Um,
Animate those spider changes, like
these ones,
yeah. So let's say that you don't see blood, and then like can you animate that spider?
yeah,
Yeah, you can.
you can do that in Substance Player. I think that's what it's called,
Well,
right?
you can get it ready for animation in Designer, but you can't see the animations in Designer. But they
Yeah,
have it's called Substance Player. So you
yeah,
just hit export to player and then you can see it.
yeah. And I'm pretty sure how you just bake out the animation like
Yeah.
anything else because it is like a lot of processing power to like go from point A to point B. So it's not something that can be done like it's just an animation that you bake.
Yeah, the thing is that like Unreal and Unity both have plugins, so you can just bring it in there and change the sliders in the engine.
And so yeah, this guy is insane. This is a replica of a ceiling in Rome, I think. And there's just an insane amount of detail,
How
and
many subgraphs was it?
it's like 32 subgraphs, or maybe I'm
32
mixing that
or
up with
something?
another
Over
number.
1,000 notes.
Yeah. So we'll get into like how a substance designer actually works, but a lot of this. So if you see like a lot of the specific details, let's see if there's a. So here the baby's face. I don't know the actual name of the baby, but in like the keys, they're all different pieces that he made prior and then added them together at the end, uh, to kind of like compartmentalize all the different parts of the graph because it can get pretty insane. And then, yeah, there's that. But yeah, also this guy's pretty crazy. He did this in a weekend. I don't understand that, but something. Uh, well,
You kind of put
yeah. Let me make sure if I miss anything. Yeah, essentially the best thing about Substance Designer is it's just you can make materials and you can get to a point where you're finished. And then if you realize like a lot of things, it's like, oh well, I wish I would have done it differently. You can always change that. You can always go back and change it. It's a non-destructive workflow that really is just allows for so much variation and change. It's all procedural. So if you make like I'll show in this, if I make one change, like let's say right now this is I think 2 boards by I think 10 going down. Let's just say like, oh, those boards are too small. Like I wanted to change it and make it only 1 by 10. That's with 15 minutes of work, then it's now 1 by 10, and the boards are much longer. But if you did that in ZBrush, you're kind of screwed because you'd have had to redo all of that work. And you can try to scale it, but that could distort what you originally had. But essentially, it's just where ZBrush is a destructive workflow, unless you have it all set up to where it's like you're working in layers or something like that. This is non-destructive, and you can have any change and variation once you're at the end. Should I go with this one first?
yeah,
Or?
go
Okay. Um,
ahead.
oh, okay, cool. So this is what you're going to be looking at for the majority of working in Substance Designer. It's okay. Well, it looks messy, but realistically, this is pretty clean because it's all broken up into like different chunks of like what I'm doing. Um, so in Substance Designer, really like similar to sculpting, you don't start with the color, you start with the height. So all of this color was added once I was finished with the height map. Um, so essentially in Substance Designer, it's really easy to make bricks or like planks. Those shapes are super simple to make, and it's really just like creating variation off of that. Um, how in depth should I go for like these?
Well, I was just gonna add, like, if that like looks like pretty overwhelming, like there's only a few handful of nodes that you just kind of stick to and rely on.
Mhm.
Like you can make pretty much anything with just like a couple of them.
Yeah. Okay. So a lot of this, um, at the beginning. Okay, so this is all of this is just it's kind of hard to say because this is just me creating cells now. But all of this was to create an interesting node that's similar to a node that's already in it, but it's called a cells node. And all this is doing is creating variations so that when I add that to my planks, it'll give these cool warping shapes. So if you pay attention to this bottom right one, that's where you see the change. It's like starting to get a little bit wobbly and things like that. You can blur it and then overlay it on top of these planks. So here's pretty drastic. You can see that these were the original planks that are using a tile sampler. You can create tile patterns as well as other things.
On the like, sliding, how it like changes.
Oh yeah.
There's a lot of different parameters for each node, essentially. Like right now, we're showing you more of a like a crazier one. We'll go into a smaller one. After this, we're just showing you like how you can combine a whole bunch of nodes right now. But each node has different like parameters on the sides. So this is the tile sample.
Yeah.
So like you can make them smaller, and then go like so small and crazy, um, based on the X and Y amount. That's really all you're changing.
Mhm.
I mean, it's gonna take forever to
Yeah,
look
yeah,
at,
it's
but-
gonna take. So as you make these changes, you do depending on what you're having it hooked up to, it will give you a live update. Do this one. Okay. Um, okay. So, wow. Okay. So yeah, so essentially you can start taking away chunks of your boards to give it whatever look you're going for. For this, I was trying to make a more stylized wooden plank, so I didn't want to have like a lot of high frequency detail in it. Things that'd be like you'd see in like actual wooden planks, like it has like tons of different like,
Yeah. Well, that node that gets that like that flat surface, it's called the slope blur tool, and it's basically the equivalent to the trim dynamic in ZBrush, where it just creates these flat faces,
Mhm.
and it's super useful for like rocks and stuff.
Yeah. And all of what you're doing to get these random chunks out using the slope blur is using noise like maps essentially. So this is a Perlin noise, and there are tons of different noise maps that'll give you different effects. This one was kind of got me the effect I wanted, where it gave me these like big chunks out of the boards. Um, say it again. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of all the like professional like substance designer, they always call the first step the sculpting phase, and then you go into like color and roughness.
So that is one of the hard parts about it is to getting like very specific details that you want. Like in ZBrush or something, you could like, oh, I want this brushstroke exactly right here, and that's easy to do in ZBrush. But in Substance Designer, you kind of have to be more creative with how you're doing it because it is all procedural. So you aren't going in and like sculpting this like divot on the plank. You have to find a combination of maps that'll give you that effect. And then right here, using a directional warp, uh, because originally, if you looked at the ends of the planks, they were pretty straight. To me, that wasn't the stylized look that I wanted to go for. I want to go for something a little bit more jagged, and this got me it. And so what I used for that was just another noise node called the cells. I don't know how it's easy to see. Just alter it a little bit, and with the directional warp, it kind of gave me a cool, what I found to be interesting end of the planks. And at the same point, I was kind of messing around with something that was more curvy, and as opposed to being those jagged edges. There's just a lot of different things you can do with it. And say I finish this and I'm happy with it, but oh, I can always go back and make that the way the planks end because with Substance Designer you can always go back.
and there's no tried and true way how to do something exactly. Like the way that you do your planks will probably start with a tile sampler or something like that, but you'll always do something pretty different. Um, there's so many, like, it's an infinite number of ways to do something. So it's just like about playing with it until you get the thing that you want. Um, so you're generally just sitting there wasting away hours trying to figure out how do I get this one lump in there.
Yeah. And it's like the more you do it, it sounds super tedious and there's a crazy amount of nodes going on. But the more you do it, the more you'll get like a trained eye of like, oh, this is the effect I want. These are probably these between 4 or 5 nodes are the nodes that I'm gonna probably want to look to use. At first, it is kind of like throwing things at the wall and seeing what sticks.
Another thing is that also as you do it more, you start getting more and more like substances that you've made before, and you can reuse stuff from that because you can just
Mhm.
copy the nodes.
Yeah. You're kind of like creating a library of things that'll be useful in future projects as you're making new projects. And so next, if you see these planks, it might be hard to see, but each plank kind of bows up at the ends, and that's just like they kind of have like a divot in the middle and bow outwards. And to do that, to achieve this look, it's kind of faint, so it's hard to see, but the effect does come through. Um, what I did to do this was all of these maps can be blended together like in Photoshop. So all of those blending modes are in Designer as well as Painter, obviously. But so essentially, I just take an invert grayscale of the planks. So I'm using the negative, not the negative space, but the space between the planks. Then I blur it, and then that gives me, it's more noticeable here, but that gives me kind of the pillowy effect towards the ends or towards the space in between. And when I apply that to my planks, again, you can't really see it here because it's kind of hard to see, but you do get this effect to where you're able to bow out the planks. Um, and here's more noticeable of what I was doing. Um, keeps going back. Okay. Um, and then it's really about tweaking the values because all for the height maps, you really only have to have uh, between black and white to work with. White being as high as you can go and black being as low as you can go. So you don't want things to be so extreme as they are in this map because this gets pretty close to 100% white and 100% black. I think they actually are. So a lot of that is like you'll probably see that this is the map I'm working with right now. It does look a lot different than this, but this is really close to 100% white. So it doesn't give you much room to go higher. And a lot of the maps that I go through will be kind of like tweaking it to make it more towards middle gray, but keeping the profile of it. Uh, say that one more time.
How much of this is you like going into say like all
This is all nodes and substance. So none of this was Photoshop, but I will say like uh, if you looked at which he made all of these shapes in Substance Designer. He like took a took things like rectangles or circles or ovals and then manipulated them using like the noise generators to kind of warp them and manipulate them. And he got all of these perfect, awesome shapes in Substance Designer. But Substance Designer works just as well if you make these shapes in Illustrator or Photoshop. I mean, if you're crazy like this guy, you can do it all and it's very fast. But for a lot of people, making that key shape or making the baby space would be really hard to do in Substance Designer. And Illustrator might save you 2 days. And so it's really just how you want to integrate other programs into Substance Designer. Um, because yeah, you know, import whatever you want into here and use it as a map. Okay. Um, and then the next step for this one was is my graph not clean? Uh, so I have these again. I didn't want to make too big, but I didn't want to make too fine details or have too high frequency of noise. So I just wanted these like long cuts. Like I was trying to replicate a more stylized look. And generally in like stylized things that I've seen, you don't really have like the super, high noised objects, such as like if I overlay it like this. Like this is something that you probably see more in like a realistic. Like if imagine if this was grain. But essentially, I'm taking this, warping it to have more of a larger, not small detail. So it's just a lot more large detail. And I get this, and a lot of the things that you mess around with in Substance has to be tileable. So if you look at this, I stretch this noise out, but when you look at it, it's not tileable at all. Um, that's where you want to use a make it tile photo grayscale mode to make it tileable. It doesn't look, it's obviously tiling, but you won't have those harsh seams. And essentially, this is just going in, getting the black and white values that I want, and then I use a gradient map, which do you know how to explain gradient map? I don't know how to.
Like it's just converting it into like grayscale.
Yeah. Well, how I did this.
Oh,
Do you know how to explain that?
We could do it. I'll use it with a simpler one, but basically like the left side, anything that's going into this node as black will like from black to white, it'll go to the side. So as you're going up the gradient of the map you're putting in, you'll get those like steps that they created.
Yeah. So
That stuff is
Right. And they basically made steps. So it like created these like lines then.
yeah. So yeah, like if this is like, let's just say this is all white, this is all gray. It pulls the information of where like if you're looking at this gray information right here is, so this like middle gray value is probably like right here. And if I made this red, now the middle gray is red. So it's essentially you're taking this gradient map or gradient of whatever you're feeding into it, and you're just changing the colors that are going into that gradient. It is easier to see on other examples, but if I make that, since I make that stepping, uh, this gives me like a wood grain effect that I was looking for. And then this is just, it's a hard thing to notice, but you're going from here where everything's smooth, and I use a slope blur again with the clouds attached to it. A cloud is just another noise to kind of chip away at it to achieve the look I want. And then one thing that you are going to want to do a lot in, oh yeah, here it is. One thing that you are going to do a lot in Substance Designer when you're making things like tiles or planks or anything is you're going to want to make sure that, like, so if you look at this right now, if I were to apply this onto my planks, like right overlay it, all of the grain would be going as if the wood was cut from that one plank. It wouldn't be like they're cut from random pieces of wood and then they're all combined. All of the grain would be going like right on top of this. So if like, so you can see how this grain stops right here as if it's not a plank associated with this originally. To get that effect, you want to use a directional warp. So that's using gradient, like a random grayscale from your planks beforehand that you grabbed, and you plug it into this to your like grain or whatever pattern you're trying to achieve, and that mixes it up. So it makes it as if these are planks were like naturally occurring and they weren't just cut from the same slice of wood, which you would never see in real life or any stylized thing. You never see like all these patterns continuing across the planks. That's just a good way to make things look more natural. And here I just overlay, I use the subtract node or subtract blending mode to cut away the grain from the wood panels. So this like slight effect gives you these wood grains. So if I like crank this up, which might not be a good idea, but it'll take a second. This bar. So you can see like the effect is more drastic, and a lot of what you do in Substance Designer is like minimal like changes because it can get pretty extreme pretty fast. So undo that one.
Depends on how big.
Yeah, the changes. So my graph's not that big. Looks kind of big, but in comparison to that one cathedral ceiling, I'm pretty sure there were like thousands and thousands of nodes, so it's relatively small.
He said it took 32 gigs to run at 2K and 30 or 64 something gigs to run at like
Yeah.
4K a whole 1,000 nodes or something.
Yeah, so mine is not as big. But
Oh crap.
uh, so the changes you make at the beginning of the graph on the left. So if you make a change over here, it has to recompute all of these. Where if you made a change right at the end, it barely has to change anything. So just that's something to keep in mind. Um, if you make a change early in the graph, it will run. It will take a little bit longer than if you made the change at the end of the graph. Um, now when you go back to the normal state, yeah. Um, that is one important thing. If you want to if you want to use it in Unreal, like Unreal does have a great plugin for Substance Paint or Substance Designer. But if you have a huge graph and you make a change, you expose a parameter on
at Substance Alchemist, which is cheating, by the way.
Oh yeah, that's not working.
You gonna plug me in after this one? No, we're not. No, oh, there we go.
Damn.
Okay, cool.
Never mind. We are back.
This oh, is it?
Is it still streaming?
I don't know.
But we can. Oh, no.
It's still recording.
Cool.
We'll see if it
All right.
correctly. Okay.
You want to show them?
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Well,
No.
Oh. So that was our quick little Optimus demo.
Yeah.
This is
Uh,
why you say.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that was just applying the grain. And what I was saying before it's completely crashed was if you make a change at the beginning, if you expose a parameter such as like how many tiles you want, um, but if you make a change to expose how many tiles you want, so that when you're completely done with it, you want to be careful about having that in Unreal because Unreal will have to do all of that processing. I don't know the correct word for it, but it has to go through all of that time to compute it.
Change ripples throughout all the nodes.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I don't believe you can change it in real time. I think there's like a bake button.
Um,
You guys notice if you change like something toward the end of your output, does it take less time?
yeah.
Okay.
That's what I was like. That's what I was meaning because it has to go like you said. It ripples through. So if there's only two other nodes after the change you're making, there's barely anything to do. And you can expose how long each node will take to calculate. A lot of them are like near zero, but there are some like the tile generator or the tile sampler that's like 600 milliseconds, and that does add up.
Yeah, and a lot of times like the grunges are also take a little while too because the grunges are actually graphs inside themselves. You can bring other graphs onto this graph.
Mhm.
So those ones are just another substance graph that you can actually like open and edit too.
Yeah. Okay, and so all of these, like we were saying, you can make subgraphs. That's essentially what this is right here. Like when I do the knot creation for these, it's essentially I could have broken this into a subgraph, but this is kind of a visualization of it. I start with one shape. I can click it. Yeah, so I start with this shape. I randomly disperse it. Okay, there's not one. Randomly disperse it. And then once I have these like kind of faded spots for where I want to have my knots. So all these knots are where they are on the planks. But to make it look a little bit more natural, as opposed to just knots that are just like falling right onto them, I probably could have done a better job of it. But you can see how the grain's kind of warping around it, and that's kind of how in real life it works too. But obviously looks better. But that's what I'm doing here with this warp node. I'm warping the grain around where I have these kind of little placeholders for the knots. So it kind of looks as if everything was made with everything else in mind. Then I use the same gradient technique that we were showing before, less drastic than in the other one, but just to get a few rings in the knots. And then here I add in these cuts, which it's just another, I do the same exact process, but instead of a shape node where I use, I think, a parabola or paraboloid, I use a starburst shape, which is essentially just, you can get a lot of different randomness with making cuts out of a center point. And I go through processes of like displacing or randomly displacing or randomly, what's the word I'm looking for? Dispersing it the same way in the same spots I did as the other ones. So when I add these together, they're all lined up correctly.
And he's using another like splatter node basically to put those shapes on top of where the knots were too. And you can actually like link those parameters so that when you change the knot sliders, it changes the other sampler so that they are always lined up.
And then right here, I do the same. It's a little bit harder to tell because it's less drastic, but I do the same directional warp using that random grayscale for the planks. So this way that you can see that some of them are cut off now. They're not, if there was a gap between, like right here, let's say there's a gap between there, the wood knot would just continue to the other side, and that doesn't look natural. And so the way you get around that is doing that gradient or the directional warp to where these are now kind of more naturally dispersed. So when you add it all together at that point, you have these faint knots that end up looking like this. Then next, I wanted to go like you generally when in Substance Designer you want to start from big to small. And so you get your planks done, the main shapes of the planks, then you edit them how you want them. But then the next major shape is the wood grain, and then going even smaller, it's the wood knots, and then I have small damage that I add into it. You don't want to add the small damage first because then it could also have like negative effects on the line, and it's the smaller details, so it's less important to the overall silhouette. But what these look like this, so all of these small chunks, um, I'm using to get like right here. These like if something like fell on the wood to just like take a chip out of it. That's what I'm applying right here, and I do a similar process as I did for the overall shape of the like warping of the planks. I have a noise map. Which right here is the crystal one. If it loads, you can see it. It might not load. But I use a slope blur grayscale again. Um, there it is. That's what the crystal looks like. So I use a slope blur grayscale, and that kind of takes chunks out of the wood, and it procedurally generates those chunks out based off of whatever noise you're inputting into it. So that gives a good effect for kind of having wood chips being taken out of it. And contrary to what I did in the past of using the directional warp, I didn't want to use the directional warp here because I wanted this to replicate like you dropping things on the wood. Like these are old planks, and so if you drop something that made this chunk, it'll probably affect the board next to it. So I didn't want to make that make the same decision with the directional warp that I did in the past. Then right here, I'm adding the nails, and so it could have been broken off into a sub graph as well, but all I do for that is where's okay. So for nails, it's a little bit tricky, and especially with shapes that are not perfectly rectangle. So like these have a lot of jagged edges on them. But what you would do is you have your input of your planks, and you run it through a levels node, and you're able to kind of isolate the spots that are the highest white, which are for me the ends of the planks, and that's where I wanted my nails to be. So that gives me kind of a mask, so I can lay my nails there and nowhere else. Like you'll never see a nail in the middle of the plank because of this mask. And then I use a tile sampler, which is the same thing that I use to make the wood planks, but you can use it with a variety of shapes. And for this, I use a disc. And I use 4 and 20 because the planks are 2 and 10. So I essentially just double the amount. And that gives me 4 nails for every plank. And then I just use a series. There's a lot of parameters in the tile sampler to where you can offset position. So yeah, I have the global offset altered, so that way you can kind of mess around with where you want the nails to be exactly placed. I do that for another thing. So yeah, I had to do it twice to get the nails exactly how I wanted them. Let's see. Okay. So before I added the nails, I kind of wanted to replicate how the nails would actually be made or be put in. And I don't know if this adds to it, but I wanted to have an indent of where the nails went in, as if it was like hardly like if it was like struck into the wood and it kind of warped the surrounding area. Um, and all I did for that was subtract the same discs, but I blurred it. So the discs weren't like sharp nails; they were more just like kind of like subtle indents to where you can kind of see it in some spots where there it just catches a little bit of the shadow, and I thought that looked appropriate.
If you look at the blending node, all the blending modes are just like the layers in Photoshop, like multiply and
Mhm.
all that stuff.
Yeah, it does help to know what those do, but I feel like I never really memorize what they do.
Yeah.
So it's just like I scroll through all of them and see which gives the effect that you want. And these blending nodes, I should have probably touched earlier, but that's just how you combine everything, like the same as in Photoshop. Um, but a good way to think about it is if so, I have, let's see. So feeding into the bottom of this blend node, I have the planks, the wooden planks. What is realistically on the bottom, and feeding into the top, I have the thing above it, which is the nails. And that's a good way to go about it. Usually when you're using the blend node is what's realistically on top of it and what's on the bottom. So if you're doing something on the ground, let's say you have your whole ground made completely, and you also have leaves made. You're going to want to put the leaves on the top of the node, on the top node input, not the bottom. Um, and that'll usually like kind of eliminate some of the guesswork of how to combine these.
Also, make sure you're doing what he's doing with the naming of
The frames.
the frame.
Yeah, these frames are kind of a lifesaver because I'm adding them in as I go, and it's somewhat slow. But if I deleted all of these frames and then pulled out of here, and it'd be a mess, and you would have no idea where to start for going back and making changes. It can get very messy very quickly. What next? Okay, so that's after the nails. That's really about it. I make this is my dirt that's underneath it. I don't know if you can even. That's pretty dark. Uh, it's just like a very rough, like splotchy dirt that you can barely even see. But I didn't want it to be just black, and because I wasn't really quite sure of like where these wood flakes would actually be. Um, so that's it with the height. Uh, Next, once the height's over, you generally want to do the albedo next. Is that what
Yeah,
you
well,
usually
do you
do?
want to show how you do the normals, just with the normal node?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I always forget to do that because I have my like template set up to where it just does that. Okay, so one main thing to like keep in mind and to really start with when you're working with Designer is you have to plug these into outputs or you're never going to see anything. So when you load into Substance Designer, I think these are all shown by default,
Not the AO.
Yeah.
not the AO. Oh,
Not
okay. Okay. So yeah, all of these are outputs for what is going to be shown in the 3D view. There's the base color, roughness, metallic, the normal map, the height, and the AO. And the AO is not in there by default, but you really do want to have the AO in there. Um, and how you add nodes is just pressing space and then you type the node. So ambient occlusion.
And also to get the normal, it's just one node. You just plug your height map into that. And what's cool is Substance Designer actually can convert normal maps back into height maps. And AO you just get from your height map also. So you see, like, just basically all those nodes are just coming from the height map, which is why it's really important to just do that first too.
Yeah. Yeah, because like you said, all the normal, the height, and the ambient occlusion, obviously the height, but they all come from your height. And then you can make changes after the fact of like how intense you want your normal map to be, um, and also how intense you want your AO to be.
Another thing is that like AO nodes are like super useful for like other parts of your graph too. Like a lot of people they'll make these rock materials and they'll put like moss or dirt or in the crevices and you can use your AO map as a mask to put stuff in there.
Yeah, I think I was dumb and I made like 3 AO nodes. The AO nodes, I don't think any of these, they all say 0 milliseconds. it's not right. I don't know why they aren't like showing the accurate times.
Yeah, that's what I'm
Um,
saying.
but the AO node is probably one of the heaviest nodes you can use. So you don't want to use it that often. And it's best to, if you're going to need the AO node 3 times, you might as well just pull from that same AO node because it's not going to change if you're using the color. Uh, so going to the color, so for the color, you want to use, like, since it's all procedural and you can't use any brush strokes, you want to use all of the maps that you've made for the height for some point in your albedo. So for this, just to start, I take this point of my wood where I took away the small chunks, and then, oh, whoops. Okay, sorry. So, never mind. That is not what I did. Uh, so like Keith was saying, you generate your normal map based off of your height, and so the normal map is also really good to make your albedo. And there's tons of different ways to go about this, but this is just how I did it for this. I use my normal map right here, and then I run it through curvature smooth nodes, um, which kind of give me a nice gradient based off of the height.
So a lot of people bring their models in and make the curvature maps in Designer versus Painter because it has like a different algorithm that a lot of people like more.
We do have links for that at the end for how to bake in Substance Designer. So essentially, what I get here from from blending these two curvature nodes on top of each other is uh, a good gradient of where the highest peaks are. And so for a lot of stylized things, you'll see that the edges of them are are like near white, or like a very bright color. And that's what I want to achieve when I have these like light brown spots. And so, like we were using the gradient node a couple minutes ago for the wood grain, you can use that same thing for the color, and it's a good base to start with. So what it's doing is, let me just pull this back up so you can see. So in the darkest spots, it's going to be this extremely dark brown. And for the lightest spots where it's like the peak of the wood planks, you're going to have this tan color. And everywhere in between, like every corresponding black and white value is going to be fed through these. So it gives you a very like nice, at least starting point for your albedo. And when you add that all in, it gives you a lot of cool gradients that are based off your height. So it looks more naturally occurring than if you did it just by flat colors.
Yeah, should the pick gradient tool.
Oh, yeah,
Which
yeah.
I'm, like, limited.
Well, even just like just that in of it itself is nice because you're not sitting there and
Just throw
hand
it on
painting
some
everything.
noise map
All
just to see.
the cracks and like all that light on the edges. You're literally just sitting there doing a gradient and just moving the bars in and out, which is a lot faster than sitting there and painting everything. So it's a very nice tool to have.
Yeah. And one cool thing, if I can get both of
Oh
these.
yeah, the gradient.
So if you open up the gradient, and right now into the gradient map, I have fed just a random Perlin noise. And right now I have handpicked all of these colors that I wanted to use. But you can also do something like, say you find a cool concept that's online and you like the colors and you want to color pick from it. You can pick individual colors, but you can also pick gradient, or you can just like slide across this, and this is all the colors that you just slid across. And it's not the effect that I would use for this, but it can be very useful. Yeah, but it also creates a mess of nodes to
Yeah,
where
drag slope.
Yeah,
yeah.
if you have like if your line is smaller, you'll get like a couple nodes, and then it's like manageable. And you can also like select all nodes, and then you can oops,
Oh, okay, 1 second.
you can click select all, and you can like change the saturation or whatever of like the entire gradient. And this is like super useful for rocks because you can like select like different parts of a rock, and you can select the dirty parts, and you can blend those like gradients on top of each other and create some really cool rock patterns.
Yeah. So yeah, you can do a lot with it, and it's very useful, especially if you have a reference of what you want the color to be. you can just drag that over if you're precise with it, drag it over your reference, and you'll be able to pull all the colors that you want. Let's see what do I do next. Okay, so this is what I had from the original gradient map. And what I get to here is I also, like in these high points where they were cut, I have it be tan. But I also wanted it to be tan in the points where the chunks were taken out. So to do that, all I do is I use the same like levels method to isolate this area. So it's only going to be applying color to the areas where the chunks are out, or it's where it's at the end of the plank. So then it's fine still. So essentially, this is what it looks like when I add the color to it, and I overlay it, or I just use the copy blending mode, but to add on top of it, and it only goes in the areas where that level allowed it to. It acts like a mask. Then right here, I just mask out the floor, or like between the planks, because I don't really want the plank color to bleed into that. And then what I do here is, so this looks fine, like what I have for the color right here, but it does look kind of like procedural. Yeah. So this gradient map was just to try to get some variation in it to make it feel a little bit more like hand painted. I don't have it being affecting it a lot, but let's see if I like crank that up. Like it doesn't look good, but it's definitely something. And that's why I have it at kind of like a low intensity. But it can get you a variety of effects that might look cool because you can definitely achieve like a brushstroke pattern that you can overlay on anything, and it does give it a very convincing hand painted look. This was like a cheap attempt at that. Oh, and then right here, I'm using the ambient occlusion to just multiply it on top of it to darken everything a little bit, and so it kind of just it makes all of the crevices and knots and things like that a little bit darker. And then up here, it's really useful to break up your components for color as well as it is for height. For the same reason, it makes it more simple to color things individually. I do the same process with this. I add a gradient map, but it doesn't really do much. But essentially, I did want the highlights of the nails to also be a little bit lighter. And then I just blend them on top of it. And then for the roughness, it's essentially pretty similar to what I've done in the past. I just take this from the normal to curvature smooth to get these cool highlights. I run that. What it should like for roughness, white is extremely rough, and black is like glass, right? Yeah. So that's not what I want because you want the highest parts to be well. Yeah, it's not what I wanted. I wanted the highest parts to be a little bit to catch the light a little bit as you go across it. I have a very low roughness overall, but I did want just like the higher peaks to kind of catch the light more. You can barely even see it, but that is one way to manipulate the roughness.
And a lot of times the roughness is the next step after the height. And what you do is you just set your color to black. So it kind of acts as like a reflection map and you just can see the reflections. And then once you're happy with that, then you go into color.
So that is the wood planks. And just like one more last note about these. So I finished these, but it's like realistically, I didn't like how these were all in a straight line. And if I did this in ZBrush, I can try to move them, but I'd be mostly screwed. So with like a quick change, I was able to. Yeah, we're gonna.
Oh, that's why it's lagging. You have 3 graphs.
Does it?
Yeah, yeah, it loads
takes,
them
it
in.
loads all of them.
Yeah.
Dang. Okay, well that might be it. This guy. So yeah, this is just a version where I changed up the cracks a little bit, and I kind of displaced where the X position of where the slits and the planks were. And besides the cracks, I do like this a little bit more. It kind of makes it look a little bit more random and placed haphazardly. And then I have another graph where they're just longer planks, but that's basically all that I have for this. Yeah. Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah.
I can also do the water levels node.
Okay, cool. Oh, here, I can close this one. We're almost there. Yeah. So yeah, once you're finished with the color and you have like that variation that you want, but you want to change the actual hue of it, it's super easy. You just attach an HSL, a hue saturation lightness node to it. Then you can make your planks green or that color or that color. Make it super saturated, or you can change the lightness and it'll be super dark. Just like a lot of changes that you can make after the fact and get really whatever effect that you want. That's the good place. Do you want to go over? You want to do the water
yeah,
thing, or do you want to do?
I can add it to your wood plank, so I can just do like some.
I would just close out of this. Okay.
So like if I do like new substance graph, do I like actually
Yeah,
close,
just
close
close
it?
it.
So substance has some like built-in materials and also some like built-in like blending effects here. And let me see if I can find search like brick. I'm just gonna use like the standard like substance bricks. They look like pretty quick, you know. They don't have like the regular look pretty smooth. Let me plug it in here though. So, base color. Oh, that's normal. I think you have to have it collapsed, maybe.
There's a shortcut.
Yeah, there's a shortcut for it.
Yeah,
I was like,
sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It's kind of weird. Also, so it is tiling a little bit. I'm gonna crank that up more, so we can like see the actual like height more. So these are like these bricks are okay. They could be better.
Don't turn it up.
Oh,
Don't turn it up.
okay. So
It crashed it.
there's like there's a height blend, so I could like use that node to like put grout or like different dirt or whatever in like the lower areas, but I'm gonna use the water level node and let's see. Maybe this one. This one. It's not gonna. It's gonna make me do them all individually. There we go. I could add an AO node, but all right. So we have water now in our bricks, and let's see. So, I mean, I could have added this to as like wood planks or something, but I can like change the water level now, and let's see. So, yeah, that looks pretty good. I can also I'll set it to like I'll change the HDRI. There we go. And I can also make it frozen. So I can like change like the amount of cracks or whatever. And there's stuff like there's like a snow cover. I could add snow to the bricks, or I could take one of the other materials. Here they are. So like you could do a concrete. And then you could do like that height. think I might actually know how you get that like quicker. I think you collapse it. Something like that's backwards. Okay, well, it takes some like playing around with it. I don't know the exact settings, but basically like you can like add concrete or like it's pretty useful for like blending like stone and dirt and like all that sort of stuff together. And it's you can also do that in, like that's kind of what makes Alchemist so powerful too.
Which we could show, but I don't
Yeah.
think we have internet.
No, we do. Oh, no, no.
Alchemist
No, I thought
basically
we did.
does that.
Yeah.
Yeah, look up Alchemist. It's in open beta as well. It's
It's got the hazard sign. The other one. This one's not. Wait, is this one now hooked up to internet? You sure? I think you're lying. Let's go to your website. Let's see. Nope.
that's risky, dude.
Your DeviantArt? uh, yeah. Do you guys know what like a bitmap to material is? Anybody? Yeah, it's essentially like that was the old version of Alchemist. It's like Quixel Mixer or whatever. Uh, you can essentially take. Let's try it. That was Bryce. My bad. What are you doing? So essentially what Substance Alchemist does is it takes like a normal image. Like say you had a like a 1024 by 1024 image of just gravel. It's not tiling, it's not anything, it's just a JPEG. And what Alchemist does is you can plug it into Alchemist and it'll automatically generate the height map, the AO, the albedo, roughness, metallic from it. You don't have to do anything. It's all generated automatically, and you're able to just create tiling maps based off of images you can find online. So you don't even have to, for a lot of things now, you don't have to make it a substance designer. You can just take a pretty high quality image online, and you can make that into a tiling texture.
Yep.
Yeah, you can. I don't think they have it implemented yet, but it will at one point be able to be broken down into nodes from Substance Alchemist into Designer. Right now, I think what you could do is you could just take the maps and bring them in, but there will be more like implementation to where you can actually have all of the changes that you applied in Substance Alchemist to be able to still be editable in Substance Designer. And Substance Alchemist allows you to add things like how he was adding the snow and water. You can do that same sort of blending between images in Substance Alchemist. So if you have a really cool image of ice, you can blend that with, say, like the gravel or carpet. You can do anything.
And another thing is at GDC we asked one of them if like for Substance Designer if that's eventually going to just be replaced by everyone just scanning everything and putting in Alchemist, and he said like no, not at all. Alchemist is just kind of like the first starting steps, and you can take stuff out of Alchemist and bring it into Designer, and then start doing procedural stuff on it.
Yeah, it's cheating. When we were watching, everybody was just shaking their head because they're like, "Oh, well, all the stuff I spent 4 to 5 hours making is now useless." So just with this one, I'm not gonna go through everything like bit by bit, but essentially, yeah, it's just like this one's a lot smaller. It looks bigger because I have 3 separate ones, but if you look over to here, this is essentially what you're gonna see if you go into Painter and you want to apply it to like a lizard or whatever. This was just for fun. I didn't really have anything in mind that I was gonna put it on. But so let's say you're in Painter and you're like, I don't want these weird scales on. I made a different one. Maybe I don't like those. I made another one, and you can keep going down the line. All I did was essentially just copy this graph up here and then change the shape a little bit with subtracting out some of the shape. Like this is the original shape, and this is what I made in Photoshop in like 5 seconds. I just made a scale really quickly because I didn't want to sit there like this, like this guy over here, and try and make it in Designer. So I was like, I'll just take it in Photoshop, make it really quick, and then I use that for this one. All right, there's the basic one, and then use the basic one to take out bits of it, and then go down the line and just make it have variation in it so it sits a little bit at that one. So it goes like from high up to kind of divoting down, and then essentially just put some crazy different little variations on it. But like this is just to show off that I could keep making shapes, like just basic shapes. This took probably like I don't know, like 5 minutes come up with the first graph. And then the second graph I looked at, I think this is like a desert rattlesnake or something. And then you just keep pulling up different, I don't know, snake skins or something like that. And then you feed it into a multi-switch, and which you can just set on that one. Um, and then the multi-switch, you just name it, and you can have it pop around to different things in Painter. So you can have like 3 different looking lizards if you want to. And then, of course, like the most fun part is coloring it, in my opinion, going through and changing the variations of the color. Yeah, and then you put like another HSL on there, and then you can expose all these parameters. So exposing them just shows like if somebody were to use it or if you were to sell it, they have all these parameters in there. So this is what they're gonna see. That's obviously crazy, but it's just so that they can go through and change your material however you want. You can block off and lock the graph so that they can't go in and change it themselves or see how you did it. So if you want to keep it like a trade secret, you can, while still giving them options. So like they can go through and say, maybe I don't want it green, I want it more red. It's too saturated for me. Maybe a little bit brighter. And then you have even different color scales. And I have just the randomness of the little spots changing, which is pretty easy. Yeah, this graph probably took me like an hour total. So it's really quick once you get the hang of it. And you can make like little cool stuff really quickly. Do you want to open up another one?
If you have Discord, you could download my floor tile.
I'm not interested in that.
This one doesn't have it.
You want to
Oh.
open up the tile one? It's not very good. Unless you want to.
Oh, no, I want to do that's no, I can't.
Yeah.
Yeah, here you go. That's great. No, that's not it.
Remember
Oh, that is true. Okay, which one? Yeah, go ahead. I mean, it's just kind of fun to like putz around in and just make random stuff.
Is this computer connected to this?
No, I just said yeah.
it's not going to come up. But if I click this, it will come up. So this is just the tile material that I'm still tinkering with. It's a little, the settings are not correct for this, but just going off of like how Substance Designer and other programs can work pretty well together. Let's see. Try to find my
Did you reference it? Or let's see,
One moment.
you import it?
Never mind.
Well, what he was going to show you is that he made an image in InDesign. No, it was
Illustrator.
Yeah, it was just I don't
just
even-
a pattern.
yeah, it was essentially just like a really intricate never mind. It was a really intricate floor pattern. And I started to try to make it in Substance Designer because it's like a challenge, but it took like 4 hours and I wasn't even close. So I just made it in Illustrator and it took like 5 minutes. So while a lot of cool things are fun to make in Designer, realistically you only have so much time to work on a project. So it's yeah, you can get quick and do it in Substance Designer, like the one cathedral guy. But every project has a deadline.
That was before we discovered there's a curve node at GDC. So I was talking to the guy, and I asked him how you'd make complex shapes with, just using like spheres and squares and stuff. And he goes, "You never heard of the SVG node before? You can add it curves. Why would you waste your time doing all this?"
Yeah, and like for a project that we're working on, like to go even it was kind of janky, but like you could, for what we did, was I had a mesh of a chimney, and I applied these bricks onto it, and then tessellated it, and then brought it into ZBrush to sculpt on and sculpt a little bit. So I essentially skipped the sculpting phase and just went into Designer and had it sculpted for me. So I didn't have to sit there. And then, like what you were saying, was if I needed more bricks, like it actually doesn't look like this because it's there's a little bit more, or I should say less. The bricks are bigger. So if I sculpted those on one by one, and I didn't like it, what I could do is I could come back in here, apply the texture onto the mesh, and you can bring meshes in here that you have with your UVs. So you can see what it would look like when you're applying it. So that way you can make changes to it, then apply it, add the tessellation, bring it into ZBrush, see what it looks like, and then you can do whatever. Like we did the we retopoed it too, so it had some divots into it. So I didn't even sculpt the bricks. I just went through with these bricks in Substance Designer, which is really cool.
Another thing is, if your like network gets like a lot too big and it starts lagging like it was before, you can actually just bake out your maps and just re-import them as bitmaps, and then just keep going on from there.
Yeah, it's a really good tool to have to play with. And like this isn't even that crazy either. It just starts off with basic shapes, and then warping the shapes into little bricks, and feeding it into a sampler, and then that's essentially it. And you got bricks. Brick tiles, like bricks and floor tiles, are probably the easiest things to start with, because you're just getting basic squares and changing them a little bit.
Bricks are the hello world of Substance
Yeah.
Designer, basically.
Yeah, start with bricks. Make some cool bricks and floor tiles, and get some craziness with them.
You could just show how
Sorry.
you.
There's just the levels.
Oh, it's just levels.
Yeah,
Oh.
pop them out a little bit.
Yeah, whatever
Do you
material
want
we're
to show how
trying
you
to
do like
make,
offset?
obviously
Like you take this
we had a
tile
lot
sampler,
of
just add like a
bricks and
0.5 offset.
stuff
to it.
like that.
Yeah.
But just try to break it down into its like major components. Like if I was to
Just, like, make it-
like looking
new
at the
sampler.
planks, like oh well, I know that the
Yeah,
planks that I
we'll
want
just
to make
like make
Here,
the plank sizes. Or I guess even something more complex of like that roof, like the cathedral roof. Like there are major shapes in the roof. So you don't want to start by making the baby space. That's just pointless. You want to start by like blocking out the whole ceiling based off of its major components, and then like starting big and then going smaller.
So it's like pretty easy to make this brick pattern. Basically, it has a slider. You can make them like kind of roundish bricks, and then this offset. If you just set it to let's see here, 0.5.
And then
Yeah,
put
bricks.
some
Yeah, so we can do a little bit of random here too, and we can also change the rotation a little bit. You gotta keep it subtle. That's a little bit too much, maybe like 0.05. and then you can also make it so that some bricks stick out further than others. So with one node, you already have like quite a huge head start.
Bricks are the easiest. Do bricks.
Well, I'd say bricks are the easiest to get looking like bricks, but they're still very. If you want to get realistic, there's still like a huge gap between getting them looking realistic and just getting the shapes of bricks.
It's rough.
So there's a lot of steps that you need to go through, and as you learn it, it'll start to become more apparent the steps. But it's frustrating to start. So if you start using Substance Designer and you just kind of discouraged, it takes a long time to be even remotely proficient in it. But it is the industry standard for a lot of things. For most games, if you think of games like The Division 2 or Spider-Man, those are huge open world. I think The Division is open world, but they're huge open world games. Nobody's going through and making each individual sculpting each individual brick. It just takes too much time, and most of these teams are only 10 to 14 people. Yeah, Spider-Man had 15, and they had 10,000 buildings. So it's realistically, your time is your most valuable resource, and you don't want to waste it on sculpting individual bricks, and that applies to anything. So having somebody or knowing how to do things procedurally is a very good skill set to have, because it makes you very valuable for these projects. And really, any scale of project will benefit from having the knowledge to do things procedurally. I think The Division at the end had 30 different variants of bricks, but it all came from one map. It all came from one Substance Designer map. All they did was tweak things. Patrick had some exposed parameters. They exposed the right parameters, what they needed, and they tweaked it a little bit, and then they had 30 brick maps to use. And then that was all the brick for the entire game off of one base material. And so you can imagine how long that took compared to how long it would take to sculpt and make 30 different brick materials and ZBrush or something else like that. It'd be ridiculous.
10,000 buildings. I don't think anybody's gonna want to do 10,000 buildings.
And I just wanted to add on to the learning curve thing. It's actually really simple to learn how to use Designer. The tough part is figuring out, okay, I want to make this material. What nodes do I have to place and use to get there? And there's a lot of great websites where you can just download people's substance and just break it apart. And that's probably the best way to figure out how to use and take the steps to get from point A to point B.
Yeah. And we'll link a ton of cool tutorials or Gumroad tutorials that you can buy. None of them are really over $15, but it's really, I definitely recommend, if you want to get into it, following the tutorial, and then don't end there. Try to do a variant of the tutorial, because if you're just doing tutorials, you're not really learning it that much. You're just repeating it, and you'll realize really quickly when you start from scratch that you don't know what you're doing. So I definitely recommend doing a tutorial and then doing your own version of the tutorial. That's what helped me a lot. Because I thought I knew it, and then I tried to do something from scratch, and I did not.
Another good one's Substance Share. It's just a big free library of materials, and a lot of those have the graphs still, and you can look at the graphs and break it apart.
Yeah. Does anyone have any questions? Since December.
I could run through a brick, or not brick, or stone if you want me to.
Want to do a demo?
But while you guys just talk.
But yeah, we've only been doing it for a while. We were doing an environment project, so this is mainly for environment artists. I don't know what you guys do, but it's really useful for environment artwork. But there's a ton of things. There's a ton of applications. So it's not just that.
Yeah, people were making superhero suits.
Oh yeah, this part. Yeah, cool stuff. There's a lot of fun things you can do. The weapons. Like weapons. Yeah, there's beehive. And the cool thing about this is, if you're I don't know why you do it, but if you're super good at Substance Designer, you could model that axe, or you could sculpt the axe in Substance Designer itself. But you can make the height map, and then you can just bring it into ZBrush, and then you can tessellate it. And so now you have the wireframe is shitty, but you have essentially an axe. So if you are more proficient in substance design than you are actual sculpting, you can really just do it all in substance design and actually have a usable mess that doesn't rely on displacement.
In order to get the ambient occlusion map, also you make an output node and you set the usage to ambient occlusion, and then all you do is you just drag that on your material and set what it is. Now it's like turn it black because I don't have a height map, so it thinks the whole thing's in shadow right now. I can fix that real quick. So I'm gonna see how quickly I can make like a stone material, like if they have anything to say like while I'm doing it too. But like if this was my height map, oops, ambient occlusion.
That you said tessellate, is that different than like doing like a projection?
Well, what you'd want to do to get the displacement of the map in ZBrush, if you applied it to a plane, that plane probably needs like 2 million polygons. So it's like obviously that's super dense. And then I meant tessellate. When I said tessellate, so I apologize. Tessellate is just increasing the density of the mesh. But so you bring in the ZBrush, you make a plane that is pretty high poly, just subdivide the crap out of it. And then you just project the displacement onto it, and it'll be super dense. But once you have that, and say if you wanted to retopple it like he did for this chimney, you just decimate it, and it makes it.
You want the
like,
other
super
one?
low
That one's
poly, and it creates
scoots down.
a silhouette.
So tall.
And another thing, I don't know if I said this, but like when I was sculpting and when I got to the point where I had to profile the planks that I wanted, where it has that curve in it, I could have just brought that into ZBrush and be like, oh, this is my base that I have, and it's tiling. So now I can sculpt whatever unique detail I want on it, and then I could have just carried on from there, or I could have sculpted the detail, like the edge wear and all of that, and then I could have brought it back into substance and do the coloring in substance, painter or designer. It's really just being creative with how you're using the programs because no program is an island.
Yeah, like you could skip the gradient map in Designer and just say, I'm gonna actually hand paint it. Apply it in Painter and then just hand paint it yourself. So if you don't like the gradient node, or you just want something more on your own, like you can flip around wherever you want, which is nice.
This is a good question. I would say probably
At the beginning, pretty long time.
a little over. I don't know. I'm bad at estimating amounts like that, but I'd probably say it's not unrealistic to say like
Another thing is I can select a node like later down the pipeline, and then if I click here, I can still see it while I change earlier parameters, and it'll update what it looks like later. So
Also,
The noise no, right now, but it's like
right,
okay. Also, don't do your maps in 4K. It's at 512 right now. So the higher your maps are, isn't it like the loading gets kind of?
Yeah, it's like how
Yours were in
is-
4K, right?
Mine were in mine were in 2K for the
Oh,
whole thing. But yeah, definitely be conscious of what what resolution you're using, because 512 is obviously much smaller than 4K. So it depends on your computer, but there's a lot of uses for using lower quality maps than what you're actually working in. If you use a noise map that is 512, but you're actually working in 4K, but you're using that 512 map, that 512 map is going to have less high frequency noise because it's just a lower quality map. That could be very useful because you might like the overall effect that it's giving for, let's say, what he's doing right now. You could like that, but it could also have some like too noisy of details in some spots. If you lower the resolution of the map, it'll lose that because it's a lower quality image. So you just gotta be creative with it. And yeah, we have spent a decent amount of time in the program. We're not that great, so it just takes time like anything else. But I think it will pay dividends when you're trying to get into the field.
More organic you go too, like with what you're trying to make, the harder it's going to be. Like if you want organic rocks, like what Keith's doing, right off the bat. It's gonna be kind of hard. And I know that's what we were doing. We're like, let's do stone. I was like, I have no idea even where to start. So yeah, if you're going with something that's blended, that are like two organics, like the water and rock that we saw earlier, this could be a little bit more difficult.
It definitely is hard to get something to look natural, like naturally occurring. Like if you're looking at like a crack in the side of cement, it looks very unnatural and very random. But like realistically, there is a reason why it cracks that way. But trying to recreate that while sculpting is very hard. I mean, I don't know if anyone's tried to sculpt cracks. It's kind of hard to make it look just because like your mind will make up patterns or things like that. So yeah, reference is important, but that's where like substance design can be really helpful because it's random, like it's procedural. You're not the one trying to sculpt these lines. If you combine a couple notes together, you can get a crack that you didn't sculpt, so it'll look random to you. It could look more natural, and you can use that as an alpha that you apply in ZBrush. So you just have to kind of find uses for the program. Can make a lot of your workflow for doing whatever you usually do a lot easier, depending on what you need. We saw somebody who made a Spider-Man suit in Substance Designer, and that was fun to try to remake. I did make it too, but you can't use it anywhere else because it's just for fun. It's pointless to me.
Damn.
But like, well, how I could use it was, let's say I actually am a character artist and I have made Spider-Man. I've made a tiling texture that is his suit because his suit has like cell shapes in it and it has like individual like divots in it that I replicated. I could just apply that material. I could unwrap the low poly and then apply the material to where it's in ZBrush now and it has that displaced suit, and I didn't have to sculpt that. Or I didn't have to like mask and extrude and do all of that stuff. So it's like even things that are useless can be useful in like very niche things.
Yeah, it's something crazy. There's rolls of money somebody made.
Oh yeah, I
that
have
one's
that. I can
crazy.
show you guys that. It's really insane. I don't know where that's useful, but
It was a little dumb, but it was funny.
well, it's like the guy was saying who did that cathedral ceiling. He's like, this was pointless, and it's not useful at all. But well, it took him a weekend, so I guess it's not that. It's still yeah, but it's like the amount of how dense that has to be. You know, it'd be better to repop load and do that. But you get so fast at doing things that are complex and hard to do if you challenge yourself that when things are more straightforward, you'll just breeze through them. It's really just about becoming familiar with the different nodes. And then when you have something more simple, you'll be able to just do it. And you won't ever have to touch other programs that you would generally use.
Yeah, so it takes a lot of like messing around with. I'm just trying to like make some sort of like weird like rock or whatever. But there is like you can do actually black and white. And it's just kind of mess around. Sometimes you'll like find something that it like looks like weird, but you realize that it looks like something else. So you'll start off making like a brick material, and then you'll end up making like I don't know some granite or something. I mean, I'm sure those two probably wouldn't connect, but you get the point.
Yeah, I remember we were messing with one. I was trying to make like a slate rock on the on a cliff wall or something like that. And then I was just sitting there playing with colors. I was like, oh, this looks like ice now. So I'm gonna just make a ice wall thing really quick. I mean, I never took it all the way to the end, but I was like, oh, now I have a new idea to make something, or just bounce around.
There's like different ways. Like you take a warp node and let's see clouds too. you can get like a cool little like almost like a rocky pattern if you warp it on itself. You get like, some nice variation stuff. And there's just like different like little subtle techniques that you can like figure out, and you can like blend that back in or something. But
Just a bunch of randomness, pretty much.
pretty much, yeah. It's almost like a noise node. Like I could even just take that and just like save it as a noise, basically. But the reason I did it like this is so I can actually uh, take this crop node and I can grab like this rock down here. Let's see here. And then I can set it to use like multiple inputs, and now it'll like that actually probably looks better, but so now I can like use like two different rocks, and that's like super useful for like leaves. You can like scatter like different types of leaves or different colors or that sort of stuff. And
I have not. Like, how would you think about like? I haven't seen anything about it, but what are you just like curious?
Yeah. There you go. So with Alchemist, you need that 90-degree angle straight down or straight on, whatever you're doing. And then Alchemist will auto-generate that. I know, I don't think it's out yet, but it'll break it up for you in Designer to all your height maps, because Alchemist will make all those for you through wizardry. I don't know how exactly, but watching it, you could take those maps, bring it then into Designer, and then take what you were taking pictures of, and then blend it with other things that you make as well. Or you can split them up, and like I'm pretty sure I was hearing. I talked to one of the guys that was doing it. I was asking him a bunch of questions, and one of them was like, "You have mud on the wall. Could you somehow like take that off and just have the wall?" And he was saying it's possible. You'd have to do some tweaking, and they haven't like tried that yet very much, but it's definitely possible. So you could do a whole bunch of different things with real world assets.
And like, if you want to get like, I mean, photogrammetry is just like just taking a bunch of pictures of an object and then you generate the 3D mesh, right? So it's like, if you want a photorealistic rock and you're able to make a like a photorealistic material in here, you can just make a base mesh of that rock and then apply it to it, and it can get you what photogrammetry would probably get you. Which I don't know which one would be more.
yeah, rocks are pretty tough. Let's see.
You could do your scales. You could bring your mesh in and really start measuring it.
Your hand sculpted.
I found one other person who did the same thing.
Why cool do that? That was pretty
This is just one more quick one. This is like I saw this at I think it was at GDC actually. Um, turn the intensity down. It was kind of like how we made like some neat little like rocks and stuff. And there's this node called like the flood fill, and what you can do is you can take basically like compartments, and you can set it to random colors, random like grayscale values, or you can just do gradients. When you plug that in, you can get something like that. And if I hit Control D a couple of times here, and I change like the angle variation of like the different ones, and then there's also like different seeds, so like that they're not all going to be the same. And if you just blend those on top of each other, just by multiplying it. I think it's multiplying, might be something do that into another one. Now you get like different, like 3 edged rocks. I'll drop the NO levels just so you can see it. Actually, if I do an auto levels, it instantly goes to the highest contrast. But I'll push it a little further so you can see it on the screen. Okay, so, and then you can basically like take, there's like some value in here. I think it's one of these 3. I'll just turn them all up. I'll do something. There we go. So you can like kind of push those, and I'll just drop this into my stuff over here. And if I hold shift, that drags the whole network over there. And you can see how you can start making some like stylized like lava or whatever you want to. I can even take this warp over here. Oops. Drag that over there. Oop. Just warp the bricks, or so then you get some like curved lines and all that stuff, and you just kind of keep playing with it.
Thinking about just sculpting all the cracks in there. Yeah, and seeing it all like jaggedy, you just increase the tessellation factor. It's an option. Can't do it on this laptop because it will explode. But yeah, that.
Crank it up. Might as well just crank it up.
It'll crash.
And it's also because it's not a 512.
Yeah.
That also, like the jaggedness is not representative of how it actually
And that took like a minute. Yeah, show the money.
The internet. Yeah, we're
The internet works here.
So
it doesn't.
and then you can do stuff like this and multiply that down. So now these ones have different height values.
You ding dong.
Oh wait, I had to apply. There you go. So now it sort of give them different height values.
Chords.
What do I have to search?
Something happened, but good thing we're switching.
Maybe not. Oh, PC. Oh, okay.
What are you searching?
Go to ArtStation. Get out of the way, key.
Can you type on his keyboard?
Are you gonna show the money?
Yeah, those money rolls.
So there's literally no reason to make this material in Designer other than you're showing off.
Yeah, a lot of people are just like flexing. So just do substance money.
Substance money.
Yeah, I think that'll come up. I'm sure it's by like.
It comes up with monkeys. Hey, search this.
Yeah, I found it.
Just type in Designer.
Oh, if you just go.
Money.
I tried that earlier today. It keeps doing like monkeys.
It'll be worth
Oh.
the second wait. I promise. You were at
Well, we
all
can look at all these
interested.
other crazy.
How about just Designer money? That's it.
And then we'll be done. So at the very least. The
Yeah,
end-
like
the
all
end
this
of the
stuff
year.
was made in Substance Designer.
That one. Yeah, that one shows how you do the roses.
You can get growth.
Just go click on the
Oh, okay, I
window.
found it.
Oh,
It opens a new tab.
PBR money stack.
Money stack.
Yeah. There it is.
Which one?
That
second,
one.
yeah, this one.
So this guy's insane. I don't know how he did it
Black magic.
because it looks like it's vector displacement, but it's not. So like this is his height map, and that's what it looks like. And he made all of that in Substance And you can see where if you scroll down a little bit more, this is well. He also made it so you can unfold it, and he also made the face in Substance. So it's like this guy had no reason to do it besides like put everyone else to shame.
Yeah, I'm on board for like a second, and then I don't know what happened.
Yeah. Yeah. So beginner stuff, but you'll get there. But yeah, I don't know how he does it because to me it looks like the space in between that shouldn't be able to be displaced is displaced, like what you see in like vector displacement stuff. So I think he just sold his soul to be able to be this good. I don't really understand, but what was that? Well, vector displacement is like if I'm remembering correctly. So it's like if you're in Substance or ZBrush, and there are some brushes that let you drag out. Imagine like a dragon scale or something. That the scale itself, when you sculpt it, has like a hollowed out inside. Um, but like there's a spot that goes over it. So I don't know. Imagine if like the scale was just this, but it was this area is empty, but you have something right here.
Like a mushroom.
Yeah, like a mushroom. So the whole like underside of like the mushroom cap. Yeah, you can also do stupid stuff like make a watch. I don't know. It'll like vector displacement allows you to have that underside. I don't know how to explain it.
It's like normal.
Oh yeah, yeah. Just
like,
Google an image of it.
Yeah,
I
like-
can't explain it. I know what it is,
like-
but vector displacement.
It's like you can get geometry to overlay.
Yeah, like concave stuff instead of just convex shapes.
Okay, well I don't know.
So that much. Fourth one.
Yeah. So that under spot where it's like a height map couldn't do that using normal displacement because it can't calculate or it can't hold the information of what's underneath that top cap. So that's where the two types of displacements, like you'll never see anything coming out of Substance Designer that has an underneath, like that has like you can't make a cave in Substance Designer that has an overhang because you can't the displacement doesn't work like that.
I think
Make a
that's,
watch, though.
But you can make a watch and make a lot of money.
yeah, and I think that's why the money one's so like impressive because it's like it's a cylinder sitting on its side, which means it loops back under itself, and you can't even tell because the way he just kind of hit it so cleverly, basically.
The beehive.
This is all Substance Designer.
The bees are also planes that were textured in Substance Designer.
Yeah, I think there's like a breakdown of the mesh. Yeah, it's just that. And it's
That's the G.
so that's Substance Designer. Pretty useful program. I would if you want to do anything in environment art, I would get into it because it's like it's the industry standard. Games are like seemingly getting bigger with smaller teams for a lot of studios.
Yeah.
So if you can make yourself way more valuable, then then you probably will get a job.
Oh wait, no, there it is. Sorry, it's that one, not Unreal. Oh,
Yeah, no problem.
Also, it has a free student version, just like Painter.
Yeah, it's all free.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's about it. Unless there are any questions, we're all set. Thank you for sitting through what is a longer.
Characters in the Unreal. Thank you guys for coming tonight. I hope you guys learned something and enjoyed your time.
Thanks for coming, Keith.
Yeah, you can. Well, price guys.
Maybe.
I think my